My name is Representative Brianna Titone, and I am the representative in House District 27, which is in Arvada, Northern Jefferson County. And thank you for joining us for the meeting today. We're going to get started with little updates with the three representatives and the two representatives and the senator. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're up to, and then we're going to kick it off to our guests, allow them to introduce themselves and talk about what they've been up to, and then we'll go into questions from the audience. And I think we're going to have quite a few questions. So if you can find the Q&A box that you have down in the bottom, get that up there, and you can start entering questions in anytime you want during the meeting. And we will get to those questions probably in the order in which they're received. So if you have a question, get that in there soon, and we will get to those questions quickly as we can. We'll try to avoid duplicate questions when possible, and please keep it respectful. And this is a public forum here. We want to be respectful to our panelists. So please keep the questions to nice questions. All right. Well, what I've been up to is been working with the nonpartisan staff in the IT department and at the House to work on remote participation. We've been trying to set up ways for members to be able to come in and not work from the actual House or the Senate. So, we don't know what's going to happen. Once we get back into the legislature, we may have people that get sick, people that may have a fever, and we don't want them to come into the Capitol, and they won't be allowed into the Capitol because they'll be taking temperatures. So we want to make sure that there is a way for people to be able to still present their bills, to vote on bills, and participate as much as they can. And some people are immunocompromised already, and anybody else who comes down with something, we want to make sure that we can have the full participation of the legislatures. So we've been working on the technology and all of the ways that we can do that, procedures and things that we can limit to make sure that it's a good experience for everyone. Also been taking your questions and answering emails online. Please keep those coming in if you have any issues with getting unemployment benefits or questions about what's allowed for your business, or if you see something that you think is not right, just let us know. We're here to answer those questions and to get that information out. And we're working every day pretty much and trying to get those answers to you as quickly as we can. So I will kick it off to Representative Kraft-Tharp, and she will give you her update on what she's up to.
Great, thank you. So I'm Tracy Kraft-Tharp. I'm the state representative in House District 29, which is North and East Arvada, the Jefferson County part of Westminster. I also am a candidate for Jeffco County Commissioner. So as Brianna said, we are preparing to come back into session on March 26th, and I think Rachel will have a great briefing for us in just a moment, a brief briefing for us in just a moment on the preparations to be able to come back. In the meantime, I've been working from home, really working with a lot of constituents and their issues around, especially around unemployment, working on some business issues on business interruption insurance and business liability, those kind of issues. And then my office has been contacting seniors in the area, seniors meaning 80 years old, to see how they're doing, check in, and to see if they have needs. We have collected a pool of volunteers that have been able to help us make calls and to be able to do deliveries, grocery, pharmacy, errand deliveries for those people that need it. So we really appreciate everybody's help. So that has been very interesting to be able to stay in contact with people in that way. And we are putting together a food drive for the north area of the county on May 30th. So watch my webpage, watch my Facebook page for more information on that. So thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Go to Senator Zenziger. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm State Senator Rachel Zenziger. I represent Senate District 19, which is Arvada and Westminster in Jefferson County. As a member of the Joint Budget Committee, I've been working on reconstructing our state budget as a result of a $13.5 billion revenue reduction anticipated for next year's budget. We have been in budget hearings for about 2 weeks now down at the state capitol in the Legislative Services Building. People are always welcome to listen in on those budget proceedings. They're all recorded, they're all live, and you are more than welcome to, in particular, take a look at the documents that we're referencing. They're all posted up on the JBC website. The first week of our work was really tackling what we anticipated the revenue forecast would say, which is about $3.3 billion worth of cuts. The first pass that we made was really kind of addressing some of the budget decisions that we had already made. When the COVID crisis struck Colorado, we were about 98% finished with our state budget. So we had to procedurally undo all of those votes that we had already taken to put into our budget. We also took a look at 10% reduction scenarios and 20% reduction scenarios and started acting on a few of those. That first week was really in advance of the forecast that we received the following week. So we did not go too far with our budget deliberations. We made about $700 million worth of budget cuts. Then the following week, on Tuesday of this week, we heard from our state economists, and they indeed confirmed that we were facing a pretty dire budget situation. We are looking to have to reduce the state budget by 25%. Which is the most dramatic reduction in revenue in our state's history. So we started the second week's worth of work tackling some of those bigger items that we set aside until we knew more about what we were going to be facing. And we have, throughout this past week, made about another $500 million worth of cuts. So if we are at $3.5 billion revenue reduction, we are not quite over $1 billion. So we still have quite a bit of more work to do coming up to get this budget ready to be introduced to the legislature by next Monday.
All right, thank you for the update on JBC. Very busy over there. Been listening in on some of those hearings to keep up, and those are all, I recommend everybody take a listen to those just to kind of keep up to date with what's going on. Well, I'm happy to introduce our guests today. We have 3 members of Jeffco Schools. We have Dr. Jason Glass, who's the superintendent. We also have board members Stephanie Schooley and Susan Miller. And thank you for joining us today. I will allow you, all 3 of you, to unmute yourselves and give yourselves a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and whatever you want to say about yourselves. And then once we're finished, we'll start getting into the questions. We have quite a few already.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Representative Titone, Senator Zenziger, Representative Kraft-Tharp. We're delighted to be with you this morning. I know there's a lot of really difficult, challenging things that we have to talk about, from budget to how we manage school to how we restart the economy. These are all really tough, difficult questions for which we don't have great answers right now. But I can tell you some of the things that we're working on and thinking about. I want to give you an overview of what I call a triple threat that the school district faces right now, and then give our 2 elected board members a chance to weigh in with their perspectives on that triple threat. The first part of that triple threat is how we end school well this year. As everyone knows, we transitioned fully to remote learning on March 13th. I think there was a belief at that point that we'd be able to come back at some time this school year. We now know that that hasn't happened, and it isn't going to happen. So that was a shock to, I think, our entire state, our entire system. Jeffco, I'm really proud of the way our staff and parents and students responded to that by starting right away with remote learning. I also don't want to whitewash it and say that it's been easy or that it's been flawless. It hasn't. This has been a really difficult transition for everybody, but I am proud of the way that we've responded to this challenge. I just want to make sure everybody hears that I'm just incredibly grateful and proud for the talent and all the energy that everyone is putting into making the best of this situation that we have right now. As we finish out this school year, we've got to keep people motivated, engaged. We got to keep kids motivated, engaged, staff motivated and engaged, and then finish those end of year celebrations and reunifying people with all of their stuff. All of that's happening over this next week of school. This last week of school coming up, and make sure that we keep people safe as we do that. So there's still more work to do on ending this year well, and I think we're going to get across that finish line. But that's been a major challenge, just keeping everybody going for these last few weeks of school. The second threat that we face is thinking about what school looks like next year, and thinking about we may have and are likely to have some kind of restrictions on the number of students that we're able to have in a classroom at any one time. And we'll use the same restrictions that are applying to the whole community. So if we're in a world where we can only have 10 individuals in a classroom, that has massive implications on how we have to structure school, because that cuts by more than half the number of students on average that I have in a class now. And I don't have double the staff. I may have less staff next year. And so what we have to do is look at different schedules or structures or how we can create some kind of in-person learning. I want to tell everybody that Jeffco Public Schools is committed to restoring some form of in-person learning for next year. We don't know exactly what that looks like. We've been looking at different international systems that are a little further ahead in coming back than we are, because the virus hit there earlier, so they're sort of through this phase more quickly. We're also studying opinion pieces and guidance documents that come from other states or think tanks, or and looking at plans that other districts have put out. And pulling all that together to think about what's the best solution for Jeffco. What I can tell you is there is no best practice yet. There is no solution. What you have are a bunch of different approaches that are trying to add elements of disease management through screening, symptom checking, changes in how students move and interact within a building, reductions in the number of people in a building that get you within the social distancing guidelines that we need, scheduling changes, combinations of remote and in-person learning. All of that is out there. So we're looking at all of those variables and trying to think about how can we create some kind of combination of those things that works and is the right fit for Jeffco. One thing that would help a lot that some other systems have had success with is with testing for the virus. We don't have that widely available testing yet, but we'll look at some combination of these things. And as you put them together, you can relax some other things. So, for example, we were concerned about requiring masks and how that would even work with elementary kids trying to keep a mask on a kid or an adult all day long. And so, because we're not going to require that, puts all the more pressure on our screenings. Symptom screening puts all the more pressure on our social distancing. So if you let up on one, it means that the others become that more important. So what's the right mixture of those things is an element that we're thinking about next year, and trying to think about how we provide support so we impact the economy as little as we possibly can. We know that people depend on schools for support for their kids while they're working, and that while the school is not able to provide that full day coverage for students, it creates a drag on our economy. Again, we're going to use the same social distancing, number of students in a room guidance that the whole rest of the community is using. So we'll see what happens as we get closer to August and what that number is and if we're able to relax it. Again, we want to restore the greatest level of in-person learning that we possibly can, and at the same time make sure that we're keeping our students, our staff, and our community safe, that we don't create a vector for this virus in one of our schools. You can imagine in a high school if we had 60 or 100 cases erupt, what that would do and how it would continue to sort of spread this through our community. Also on this second point, this second threat that we face, I'm getting a lot of feedback on it already, and I know several of you are as well or have thoughts about it. I would advise people not to fall into hard positions on this. It is not the case that we should that we should simply just give up and say we're not returning to in-person learning at all, that we should just stay in remote learning. I don't feel like that's the best thing for our families, for our students, for our economy. There are consequences to just continuing with remote learning and not having any form of in-person learning at all. Nor should we go to the other side of that extreme and say we should just pretend this virus doesn't exist and put everything back like it was. We've got to find some kind of middle ground that balances how we keep learning going, how we create interpersonal connections and relationships, how we allow school to keep moving, how we allow our schools to support the economy, and at the same time make sure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate the spread of this virus in the community. So that's the second threat that we're managing right now. And then the last one that's the other legislators have talked about is the budget challenge that we face. When the state's revenues are reduced, it in some form is likely to come through and impact the schools. Funding K-12 education is one of the major funding areas that the state has, and so we're expecting some kind of reduction to come to education. We appreciate the statements that have been made around values that our legislators have to try and protect K-12 education to the greatest extent they can, but we know that that's not likely to happen. Eventually, you're going to cut things and cut things and cut things. You're going to have to go to K-12 education because it's such a large part of the state's budget. We've been modeling and planning for a 12% reduction below our current levels in funding. So for Jeffco, that looks like mid $80 million, $84 million. A portion of that cut will be passed on to our charter schools that's proportionate to them, and that's going to leave 70 odd million that we'll have to cut out of Jeffco public schools. So to fill that, we have to think about what large sums of money can we pull together to solve that budget problem. And we've got to get past solutions like, well, just trim up the number of administrators you have at the central office, or switch to low wattage light bulbs, or cut down on your paper copies. Folks, we've got to get tens of millions of dollars. So this is a serious, serious problem that we've got to manage. And so the big things that we can do that the board has been dialoguing about, one is Jeffco has built a good cash reserve over the past several years, expecting a rainy day like this to come. So we'll have some cushion that we can use to buffer out the effect of this. But using your reserve is like using your savings account to pay your mortgage. Eventually, you have to stop doing that because you'll run out of money in your savings account. But we can use our reserve over the next couple of years because we're expecting multiple year effects to smooth out and soften the blow. And one of the tough questions that the board has to wrestle with is how much of that reserve should they spend and how fast. And so our board's going to have to make really difficult decisions this spring. And I have huge respect for the work that they do because we always bring the very most difficult decisions in our school system to our board members to solve. And so this is going to be one of those they're going to have to think through. The other major areas where we can look at reductions are eliminations of central programs, so district level programs. How can we shrink those back and eliminate them? That quickly becomes complicated because our central programs include things like custodial supports and mental health supports and school safety and transportation. And so it's not the case that you can just go to the central office and say, let's eliminate the central office funding, because those things directly impact schools. And nobody wants to be thinking about reducing custodial services, or we don't want to cut off bus routes, or we don't want to eliminate mental health supports. But we're going to have to look at some of that to get to the tens of millions of dollars that we're going to need. Other areas that we'll have to look at are the major expenditures in any school system are in humans. They're in the people that we have. So it's a human-driven organization. Over 80%, around 80% of our expenditures go to funding personnel. And so the variables on that are how many people you have and how much you pay them. And so you reduce one or both of those in some level, and that generates tens of millions of dollars. So we'll have to consider some kind of pay reductions. And if we don't do pay reductions, we're going to have to do staff reductions. And then there's a bunch of other little things. We talk about this metaphor of there's this big hole that's in our backyard. We've got to fill that hole in, and we've got boulders, rocks, pebbles, and sand. And you need to know the magnitude of what you're putting into it. We've got to have solutions that are tens of millions of dollars or less than 10 millions of dollars. If we're spending an extraordinary amount of time working on things that are $5, $10, $15,000, sure, we've got to look at that, and we've got to trim up everything that we possibly can. But we've got to have solutions at the scale of the problem. I want to turn things over to my two elected board members now to talk about that triple threat, how we end school well this year, how we plan for school next year, and how we do all of that in the midst of a budget crisis. It's really extraordinary, three things that we're trying to manage all at once. But I also just want to end by saying Jeffco has tremendous people. This is a community that has built leaders and is deep in talent. And so I'm grateful to get to work with all those folks, these folks in Jeffco. You've just got tremendous people here, and it's a great asset right now.
Susan, you want to go in alphabetical order, or do you want me to jump in?
Oh, you can jump in. Go right ahead.
And good morning to everyone, and thank you all so much, Representatives Titone and Kraft-Tharp and Senator Zenziger, for having us on this morning and allowing us to spend what I'm sure is a relaxing Saturday morning for everyone, talking about what the future of our educational system is going to look like and how we're going to get there. My name is Stephanie Schooley, and I'm one of the two newest board members for Jeffco Public Schools. I represent District 3 within the school district, which is the sort of articulation area to and schools, so all of those elementary, middle schools that feed into those areas. I'm a Jeffco parent. I've got two kids, one in elementary school and one in middle school in Jeffco Public Schools. And we live in Lakewood and have been here. My husband went to Alameda, so we're fixtures in the Lakewood community. I want to just talk a little bit about, first of all of the thanks that are due to people in all levels of working within the district. As Dr. Glass mentioned before, the switch to remote learning for this district happened what seemed like overnight, because I think it actually happened over one weekend. And we had an entire very large district, very large system pivot very quickly. And that is in great part due to the nimble leadership within our district, because it was quite a feat to be able to help guide individuals, students, families through that transition. And also, at the district level, looking at departments like IT that responded so quickly to some of the connectivity and device issues for families, translation services. I mean, these are just examples of how quickly individuals responded to be able to support students and families. At the school level, I heard many, many stories of principals and teachers driving around and dropping off Chromebooks to students, dropping off resources and supplies, particularly to some of our students who were sort of challenged to have those resources at home. Social emotional support specialists who have transitioned completely to supporting mental health needs for our students and doing virtual groups, checking in way more than they probably had to before to make sure that our kids are okay as they made this transition that caused a lot of anxiety for a lot of kids. All of this, and there's tons more people, is just to say thank you to people in all of these roles that were able to and willing to move forward in such an amazing effort to support our students in a pretty unprecedented time. As a parent, I appreciate it. And as a school board member, I am very, very proud of it. So thank you for everyone's work in doing that. Just a few thoughts, and then we can turn it over to Ms. Miller and then to questions that folks have, because I can see them lining up in there. The first piece I wanted to talk about is really to echo what Dr. Glass mentioned, which is really, what is this moment that we're in, an invitation to do or to think about in ways that we have not had to think about or do before? What is the invitation to find that kind of radical middle where we can explore neither one complete direction or the other, but how do we get through this radical middle of being able to take care of our kids really focus on what is that educational experience that we can provide to them that will keep them moving along in their learning. How do we think about equity and the capacity of our communities, our students, and their families to be able to support, whether it's virtual learning economically or in the structure of their household? What is the sort of equity issues around our educators and how they are or are not able to either continue with in-person learning or virtual learning? There are a lot of these sort of capacity issues that I think we are weighing and thinking about, particularly as they feed into those sort of values decisions that we make when we look at the budget. I said when we were campaigning, and I believe it as an executive of a nonprofit working in higher ed, budgets are value statements. And in times like this, when a 25% reduction at the state level, assuming a 12% reduction at the district level, those values are tested in ways that are horribly uncomfortable and are very difficult to talk about because they directly translate to people. And so I want everyone to just be aware that we are thinking about those issues around equity, around how we provide the highest quality educational experience for our students, how we take care of our community and our community members. And lastly, that I know for myself, speaking of myself, and I think this is a value of our Board of Education, that we do value communication and the engagement and perspectives of folks who these decisions impact most directly. This is like public education demands public engagement and demands some public solutions and public innovation and thinking about how we best support students moving forward. And so I encourage, not only invite, but encourage you to make your voice heard through any and all of the forums being provided, either by individual board members, by Dr. Glass and his leadership team, and by your other elected officials here, to really help us be thought partners as we move forward, because this is not easy work, and we need you. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Miller. And again, thanks everyone for taking the time this morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Once again, thank you to our representatives and Senator for having us. I think this is a wonderful space to be having this conversation because it does allow people to be asking questions. So thank you for providing this framework for all of us. I don't want to repeat what Stephanie has said. I think you summed it up nicely. Thank you, Stephanie, in terms of just the yeoman's job that our team Jeffco put together. Teachers, custodial services, feeding our children, the staff that went above and beyond on a daily basis. And I also want to give a huge shout out to our parents and our families who went into the remote learning world so very quickly and became teachers, complementary teachers, I should say, to the teachers that were also working online. So I think the partnerships that were forged between families and teachers, I think both sides have a greater understanding now of what their lives are like and what they face each day. There are teachers that have children at home that are attending different districts and have to deal with what their schedules are like. And then they have families that two parents are working and remotely and how that all works, or have lost their jobs. And I think it's just been a very eye-opening experience for everybody on what this has been a huge demand on everybody's skill sets, emotions, and their bandwidth and mental health. I think I received a letter from CASB yesterday afternoon, or maybe it was Thursday, I can't remember. It's all becoming a blur to me, saying, you know, this is something we've never seen in the 80 years of public education. And we haven't. And so therefore, we cannot suggest that it's going forward is going to be what 80 years, you know, the past 80 years have looked like. And I would suggest that the work that I'm in, which is working with school districts across the country, and one of my peers has been having a 5-week series on with superintendents and facility managers and COOs and CFOs from around the country saying, okay, what what are our challenges that we need to be looking at? And no solution is going to be the solution for every single school district. We have to find the parameters and priorities that are unique for our school district that are going to serve our children. But there are certainly realistic touch points that all of us are facing. I think some of the points that were raised in just the Q&A alone have been, wait a minute, we're focusing on students. What about the teachers, walking into the schools? And one of the forums that I hosted, a teacher is a first grade teacher, and she has 30 kids in her classroom, and she has a child at home who has asthma. And her biggest fear was walking in to her first grade classroom where she loves her kids and her kids love to hug her and talk with each other. And, how does she deal with that? And then walk home knowing that her son has asthma and has challenges with his immune systems. And does she go back into the classroom? So the tensions between the students' needs as well as the teachers' needs are going to be something I think we all need to be thinking very, very carefully about and be judicious. What does it look like going back? Are we talking 9? Are we talking 10? Is that a square footage basis? Are we looking at 44 square feet per kiddo or going up to 100 square feet per, per child? What are the parameters? And I think we have to be flexible and listening to what our health directors are telling us and what our leaders are saying. This is the scientific basis upon which we are making our decisions and our choices, so that families can understand why we're making these decisions, that it's not just haphazard, or I shouldn't say haphazard, but it's not just something that we came up with, that there is a basis for it. And I think we also have to realize that we do need to work with our organizations, our companies where our parents are employed, because we can't stop the economy. We can't tell parents, okay, you can't go to work, because then they lose their houses. And Jefferson County schools is not in the position of paying people's mortgages. So all of these tensions that are coming into play, I want to echo again what Stephanie said, is that we need the community to be engaged. We need to hear voices. We need bottom up suggestions and top down suggestions. It has to be a collaboration. And I think I'm thankful that Stephanie and I were able to start conversations with the community. Was it a week and a half ago, Stephanie? Okay. A week and a half ago, we had a Facebook town hall, which was a start that we'd like to keep continuing. And I appreciate that collaboration, and I look forward to continuing those conversations with our community over the next number of weeks, because it's not a one size, we're going to fix it. It has to be reality of all of us working together. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, panelists, for being here today. We've got a whole bunch of questions in the Q&A. So if you have any more questions, please keep them coming. If we don't get to all those questions, we can put them in an email and try to get those answered for you later on if we don't have enough time. But we'll just get started on some of the questions. So first question that we got here was, how will you support teachers getting better at virtual school with resources and daily virtual contacts? Anyone want to field that question?
Sure, I'll start with that. Well, I think we've gotten a lot better at it in the last couple of months, honestly. We started out with a lot of teachers trying to sort of recreate in-person learning virtually, and they ran into a lot of struggle with that right up front. And so we had to shift to these what we call asynchronous models, where the teacher is maybe recording themselves doing some direct instruction, or they're providing resources or things for students to react to, and then they're really coming in to provide individual support or help students as students work to complete tasks, that students have flexibility on when they do that work. We're likely to continue with, in our best case, models. It's a hybrid mixture of in-person remote learning going forward. And then we will likely face the probability that we're going to have an outbreak in a school and have to close that building down for a period of time and shift over to remote learning for what may be days or weeks, and then come back into in-person learning. So I think unless something dramatically changes between now and August, and then over the next school year, we're going to have to learn to adapt and become adept at both remote learning and in-person learning, and a combination of the two. So how we've done that, just to quickly answer that question, we have every Monday, we use that as a day where students sort of catch up on assignments, but it's also a day when teachers plan and do professional learning. So the district has a whole series of dozens of different classes that teachers can choose to come into remotely every Monday. And the teachers choose the content on that. So they've been telling us, here's what we need to know about it, here's what we need to work on. And so then the district creates that class. Sometimes those are district staff that are running those, but increasingly we've seen teachers start to run those, which is what we hoped would happen, is that the profession starts to drive what the professional learning looks like. I think we'll continue with those sorts of things, but I don't want to, again, whitewash that this is going to be easy. Going into a hybrid model is going to be even more complicated than either all in person or either all remote. Now you have to figure out how to do both, and then potentially go back and forth between the two.
So our next question is, what are your latest plans to help families and students who are disadvantaged or who will fall behind and need help, both with technology and with tutoring, support, etc.? And this is for any of the panelists.
Sure. Well, I can speak to it first, and then I know that Stephanie and Susan are passionate about this issue, so let them speak to it as well. I'm really concerned about this. We do track engagement across all of our schools, and while as a district we've been trending north of 95% in engagement, and we measure that by, at some point during the week, did the student log on, did they interact, did they turn something in, so are they engaged? We get really good engagement out of our really affluent schools. Almost 100%. We get less engagement, 80% on average, out of our more impoverished schools. So that's the effect that you're talking about, that you've got families that are working, that the student doesn't have the support at home, that they've got struggles that they're dealing with. Life is a lot more complicated, and it's causing that student to engage in education, at those students to engage at a lesser level of engagement. So what we've been trying to do is identify those students who are not responding and reach out directly to their families repeatedly. We have asked in some cases, law enforcement to do welfare checks, or social services to do welfare checks if we just have somebody that goes off the grid. But that is overwhelming those systems, the volume of that we're having in some parts of our community. As we come back into next year, we're expecting students to have some areas where they're going to be behind academically. One of the struggles that we're thinking through and designing school for next year is, do we take all of our interventionists, everybody who's certified to teach, who wasn't in a teaching role, and put them in a teaching role? And that helps us get to that lower number of students that we need in a classroom. But at the same time, it removes your ability to intervene or individually support. So if I put everybody in a direct classroom teaching role, then I don't have the bandwidth or time or capacity for the individual interventions. So this is a really tough issue that we're going to have to think through, and what is the right combination of those things, where we try to meet the social distancing guidelines, so we have students in person, doing in-person learning as much as possible, but then how do we do individual interventions and supports for students that we know are struggling? Stephanie and Susan, any thoughts you have on that?
I just wanted to add one point, that I also believe strongly that this moment, whether it's helping students to catch up from learning loss and remediation efforts, or supporting this hybrid, whatever hybrid model ends up moving forward, we need, I think, and are going to really depend upon community partnerships to be able to make this happen, and really add to the capacity of the district itself to serve some of those student needs. I know in some ways this is already beginning to happen, thinking about some of the work in higher ed, University of Colorado, Denver, and their teacher preparation programs are really thinking creatively and sort of starting to innovate around how do we, if we can't have student teachers in classrooms, then how can we provide to them some virtual opportunities to support students, to support districts in the work that they're doing to help with student learning. So I do think that this is part of a larger conversation, not just for the district to really think about and become much more creative about how we're going to meet some of those needs, but also an outreach to chambers, to local businesses. If it's tutoring programs, perhaps it's partnerships with seniors. How are we going to really build the capacity of the district by engaging our community in perhaps a very different way than we've seen before? You're on mute, sweetie.
Am I? I know I love to talk on mute, so to see if you could see what I'm saying. Are we ready for the next question? Okay, so when will you be holding parent community group focus groups to get feedback about the extra loads being shifted to parents? Feedback I have heard indicates extreme stress and rising mental health for which there is no time at this point.
Yeah, well, I think built into that question is a statement, right? That somebody is stressed and has some concerns at home and is overwhelmed and doesn't have the tools that they need to support the students the way that they would like to. We've got 2 Jeffco kids at our house, and we feel like that too. Sometimes you'll see them walk back behind me here. We have put in place, and I just want to share my screen quickly. If somebody could activate that, I'd love to share some supports that we do have.
Michelle, could you allow Dr. Glass to share a screen?
You should be all set.
Excellent, thanks so much. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is the Jeffco COVID-19 website, and so if you just search for Jeffco schools and COVID or coronavirus, it'll bring it up. It's also accessible from just the main page. There's a ton of resources on here, and so there are things like mental health resources, and you can see that we've kept adding to this as this period has gone on. Everything from navigating, supporting mental health for yourself and for your child, deeper dives into how to talk to kids about COVID-19, or how to talk with teens, videos from some of our professionals, or anxiety around COVID-19, suicide supports, district mental health supports, and then a ton of other resources if you have something urgent that you want to connect to, and then other community resources as well. So we've continued to add to that list of mental health supports that's available. The other thing that I would point out is there's also supports for parents around remote learning resources. So I'll point to that here. And that lists all of the tools that our students are using to work together. So sometimes parents have had to be IT support, they've had to be work in paraprofessional positions. And so like, how does Soundtrap work, or how does Google Classroom work? So there's supports for our parents on how to do those things, as well as we have technical support. So if your Chromebook stops working or something's weird, or you entered some keystroke and you can't get out of it, how you can contact that. So we continue to update this as we hear concerns from parents. We have had what we call pulsing surveys, where we've sent out to the community on 2 occasions. How's it going? How's remote learning going for you? For the most part, the feedback we've gotten back is pretty well, but this is stressful. There's a lot that I don't know, and we even give people the opportunity when they say that they need help, they need somebody to reach out to them to enter that, and then we do reach out to them, students and families, and provide them at the shoulder support if they request that. So that's what we've been doing to sort of support all of our families in shifting into this new role of really being a paraprofessional teacher along with their classroom teacher at home.
All right. Thank you for that explanation. Anybody else want to add anything to that question? All right. The planned reopening for Jeffco seems to have many protections built in for students and their families, but almost none for staff. The only one I can see is to keep distance from students, which relies children and teens to follow guidelines that adults are struggling with. How do you ensure that their safety of the staff and their families?
Our, our, our plan is in a draft format right now, and it's only been released to the Jeffco district and school leadership and our association leadership. So that's who has seen it, and the Board of Education has seen the draft plan right now. And honestly, it's our best thinking at this point, reviewing all of those other systems and trying to pull together what we think are good practices that might work here. We wanted to put that together and put it in the hands of district and association leaders and our school board and get feedback on that. So that's happening right now. We will revise that based on the feedback we get from that group. And then on Monday, it will be released more broadly to all of Jeffco Public Schools staff. And then they'll have Monday really through Thursday morning to provide feedback. And we'll be doing edits along the way, ideas, critique, things people like, things people don't like, recognizing that none of us would like to be doing any of this, right? We would love to have a different set of facts and circumstances to be operating under, but that's not the reality that we have. So given that this is the hand we've been dealt, what do you think about this proposed solution to it? On next Friday, on the 22nd, we'll be releasing that document to the world, and especially to our community. And there'll be opportunities for feedback built in, forums for feedback built into that, where we continue to gather information from our community. So we got 3 rounds of feedback. We're trying to be balance this effort of being very forthright with here's what we're thinking, and at the same time try to put out something that is well thought through, that represents our best work at that point. And then we go into the summer, and we may get changes in the standards of social distancing. Right now we've got some ambiguity because we hear less than 10 in a room, and then we hear 6 feet apart. That's not the same thing. And if we went with a 6 feet apart, we could serve more students. But right now it's less than 10 people in a room. So it's really 8 students if you have a paraprofessional and a teacher. So all of that to say that we're gathering feedback from our leaders, from our staff, and from the public in the creation or of finalization of what's going to be eventually our plan going forward. We have to take into account the safety of our staff like everybody else. Anybody that comes into the building, Jeffco Public Schools is responsible for putting in place mitigating steps to contain and control this virus to the greatest extent possible. And so things like the temperature checks, the symptom screening, the social distancing, if we get testing available, that is something that we would do also, some combination of all that. So keeping our staff healthy is absolutely an important part of this. Keeping our community healthy is an important part of this. You have to have this wide and all-encompassing approach. You have to think about all of it. So that's one of the reasons that we've gone through these 3 rounds of feedback that we're in the middle of right now, and we've continued to gather plans from all across the world because we want to make sure that the plan that we put out it doesn't miss something. There isn't something that we forgot to think about. So it's this constant feedback and data gathering process that we're in right now.
So the next question is very appropriate for me to ask. With Jeffco and many other school districts facing budget shortfalls, what community and other partnerships can Jeffco look at to ease some of that burden? For example, vendor partnerships, transportation options, or other areas that could help fill that gap? And this is to any of the panelists.
Yeah, I'll start, and I'll love to turn it over to Stephanie and Susan. Stephanie talked about this a little bit, the importance of engaging the whole community in these supports, and our nonprofits and other governments have been great. They have really stepped up to support our schools. So our faith-based organizations, other municipal governments, the county, the Action Center, nonprofits across the board, incredibly helpful. While that helps us, it again, I go back to we may have to cut $70 or $80 million And there isn't a philanthropist in our community that can solve that problem. And we've got to think about how we do it at scale. So if we're going to shift to, if we're going to make changes to our food service program, I got to make sure that every community can access that. So just because we've got the church or a nonprofit in Arvada or in the Columbine area that could support that community, how am I doing it in Wheat Ridge? How am I doing it in the mountains? How am I doing it in Conifer? So we've also got to think about equity and how we support the whole community. I really appreciate and acknowledge that our nonprofits and all the other groups have been incredibly supportive, but their capacity wasn't built to handle this either. So I do think we're gonna end up making some really hard decisions that the board is the one that's going to have to make those tough calls.
I would like to chime in on that, and that is we have certainly had people reach out to, offer help. Can you use our buildings? Can churches be available? Can rec centers be available? Can other places be available that would extend the opportunities and the capacity for our schools? The big challenge, I think, that Dr. Glass's team and we face as a community is the safety and security for our children. First and foremost, I think everything that, at least in my space, is centered on what is best for the child, and how do we keep the child the center of that, and recognizing that that child may need supports that only the school really can provide. How do we expect a community center to be providing certain facility needs that one child might have to have in order for their education requirements? So I think the more we can leverage our community, absolutely. I think it's just how best we do that, honoring what those individual child's needs are. And I know some people, for example, have already started to go back to their daycare centers and are facing challenges within the daycare centers, and realizing that those centers may not necessarily be able to take back all 20 kids at the same time. And so how are community centers and churches helping those organizations? So it is a bigger problem than just Jeffco schools. And I think we have to solve it as a community, not just as one organization. It is going to be a community effort.
Great. Did we want to go on the next question? Okay. So a lot of these are pretty duplicative, and we've got a lot of questions talking about, where the cuts are going to come from and the support in the fall. But specifically, David Mary Jo asked, you've mentioned a need for coaches to help struggling students. Are you interested in recruiting lay volunteers to help online help in this area?
I think that's a great idea. Honestly, I wish that our capacity was stronger in this. Some districts have a volunteer coordinator that sort of stands up a whole program like that. It's not capacity that Jeffco Public Schools currently has, but I think it's got merit. I've heard from a number of our high school students that say that they're willing to help younger students. I think that's a great idea, and if we could figure out some way to do that at scale, I think that's tremendous. People like Reg Cox and the faith organizations that he helps coordinate, they've got a number of volunteers that are going out into our schools and acting as coaches. Could we scale that across the whole community? So I think these are great ideas, and we're going to need to work, as Susan was saying, we're going to need to pull together as a community to find a solution to this. And I think using community members to help support learning and build those relationships with our kids is going to be essential. What's saving us right now is that we had a whole year of relationships built when we went to remote learning. That is what's keeping us going right now. And as we go into potentially a fall where we're going to have less in-person contact, it's going to make those relationships even more strong. So how can we build a system of support and a network around every child where they've got people in their lives that care about them, that are supporting them, and using our community and our older students to do that, I think is a great idea. I don't know how we're going to do that yet, but I want to work on that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Can I
go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
I just want to say, and because I've been monitoring some of those questions in the Q&A as well, and that there are so many possibilities around whether it's community partnerships or how do we engage intergenerational partnerships or with older students that have just recent graduates. And all of those are ways in which I think we have to be thinking as we move forward about, as Dr. Glass said, how do we build the capacity of Jeffco Public Schools to be able to engage in those ways with our community partnerships. And then just to point out that the time frame for this 2020-2021 decision making is really short, and that the board and the district and leadership, what may be possible to do and continue having conversations about, which I think is critically important, continue engaging with community around how do we build that capacity for future years when we may still see ongoing budget cuts, or we may still be rebuilding from existing budget cuts, is really important. And that in this moment, we have a matter of weeks to make some of these decisions. So I just want to point that out to say that if there's some frustration over, okay, but what is concrete? What are we doing right now? How can we build this? That it's, to me, at least as a board member, trying to think about how we address some of those immediate decisions that are going to be kind of coming onto the board table in the next 4 weeks. We sort of can't decide how many weeks we have, but it's short. Versus how do we then also at this, like, simultaneously build some of those platforms and communication methods and engagement methods to really rethink and continue to critically kind of build what this education system is going to continue to be for our students moving forward.
And I'd like to just build on that. And I'd like to say that, you know, this is an opportunity, despite how challenging it is. And we all know that this is just a daunting challenge for all of us. But what does this provide also for us as an opportunity to rethink what the education model might be looking like that really can take and feed our children over the next 12, 18 months of uncertainty, so that they can continue to ensure that we provide them a great education and a great opportunity to grow academically as well as socially, emotionally. All those parts have to be put together, and we need to figure out how we make that really work for our children, because the last thing we want is this to be a COVID loss. That's, I think, the last thing we want for our children is, oh, well, it was 18 months of COVID, and so therefore, you know, we just let it slide. I don't think any of us are in that position or want that to happen for our children. So how do we make it a robust opportunity to pull together our communities from not only our schools, but, as we said earlier, other partners in all of this?
So can I jump in with a question here? So one of the questions that's happening down at the legislature is the concern about when kids come back to school, whatever that means, of the increased mental health, social, emotional learning issues that they will be struggling with. So can you talk about how you are prepared to be able to help kids and families with those increased social, emotional, mental health needs?
And teachers.
Oh gosh, and teachers, yes.
Sure. Well, I give credit to the board and previous boards that have invested heavily in mental health in Jeffco. So Jeffco really has a nice system of mental health supports that range from counselors to social emotional learning specialists to school psychologists. There's a nice array that's here within the state of Colorado. Understanding that the funding limitations that we have, it's one of my professional opinion, one of the better models in the state. So, you know, as we go into budget cuts and we then start thinking about, okay, we need to eliminate some district programs, that's going to have to be talked about. Like, can you continue to pay for this? Because it's not mandated, it's not required, but we know we've got this huge need. So that's going to be one of the tough, I think, decisions that we have to process through. Now, nobody wants to reduce mental health at the very time that we know we're going to need it the most. But anytime you earmark something and say this is protected, it puts that much pressure on something else. So I think we're going to have some really difficult decisions to make. But we should expect students to come back with some level of trauma, staff to come back with some level of trauma, and think about how we can support that. We've got a wonderful coordinator, mental health services and suicide prevention services with Michelle Gonzalez. One of the things that she's taught me is that when we look at the factors that lead toward suicidal ideation or mental health concerns, a lot of it has to do with a lack of connection. There's no one that I feel connected to in a relationship with. And what she's taught me is that the solution is the same thing as the problem. We solve the mental health problems, or we support the mental health problems, maybe is a better way to say it, by making sure that we build those relationships around all of our students and our staff, where they have people in their lives who are interested in what's happening with them and that care about them, someone that they can talk to. I think we're going to have some really tough challenges with this, and I want to do all we can. A value that I put forth, going back to what Stephanie was saying earlier in this budget process, a value that I put forth, knowing that I don't get to make any of these budget decisions, all I can do is recommend. A value that I put forth is that we need to hang on to all of the capacity that we possibly can. Hang on to every program, every service that we possibly can, because our students are going to come back to us with even greater needs than they had when they left.
If I can just add on to what Dr. Glass just mentioned, a couple of points. One, just as a community resource moving forward, and if I get this acronym wrong, I'm going to be really upset because I went through the training, but QPR for the suicide prevention training. I know it's been offered through the district, but also through community partners like Jeffco PTA does a just suggested donation free to anyone in the public. My husband and I went and spent a Saturday going through that, and really, again, to build up the awareness around the mental health supports and needs for our students and be able to identify some of the possibilities where we can be helpful interventionists ourselves. But as Susan was saying, to be able to provide these supports to educators, to our support staff and folks working in our schools, to other community members. People are losing jobs at high rates. We have a lot. This is a community crisis, and I feel like we can help support that. So I would encourage folks to look at the Jeffco PTA website, because they are continuing to provide those free suicide, or not suicide prevention, but that QPR training as we move forward. I just wanted to put that out there.
Just one quick addition on that, just for just a second. 5A created a huge boost in support for mental health services in Jeffco. So just thanks to the voters for passing 5A. We put those monies to good use.
That was definitely worth adding. So our next question is kind of around decision making, like who makes the final call? How does that happen to return? And what kind of rules would be placed around that return? Is this a decision that's made solely by the superintendent or the board, or some sort of combination? And then related to that decision-making structure, what's the timing of these kinds of decisions, and how can people add their input?
Great question. Well, it's a governance question. So the Board of Education are your 5 elected representatives from the community that govern Jeffco Public Schools. And they direct me through a set of policies that say, here's the goals that we want you to accomplish, and here's some of the limitations that we put on the power that you have. So it really is a combination of things that I have the authority to do, and then things that are reserved for the board to act on. So one of those things that is reserved for the board to act on is our budget decisions. What we do and what I do as effectively the CEO of the organization, I pull together proposals, ideas. If they want something researched, I have the team go and research it and bring back ideas. They critique that or provide feedback. We keep working on it. So we do some of the work in supporting the Board of Education when it comes to something like budget decisions, but that is solely within their authority to make the decision. It's not a decision that I get to make. Other decisions are superintendent decisions, like staffing configurations, how we staff, what things like big facilitating day-to-day things. Those are the things that I decision on. And so it really is this combination of things, but I would say that when it comes to the budget, that's a major one that they're going to have to decide. And we're looking at this right now, but we think that the board is going to have to vote on the restart plan, and the reason being that in the board policies that say, here's the limitations on the superintendent power. One of those is that I have to bring them a school calendar that meets the state requirements, and I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to have to bring them a calendar that doesn't meet the number of days. And so we right now believe that that's going to have to be a decision that the school board's going to have to make, knowing that the staff of Jeffco Public Schools and myself, we're going to have to do all the legwork to make sure that we brought them a really well thought through plan to review. Governance discussions from our board members.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about, kind of related to one of the questions we had earlier about staff procedures. What do we do with teachers who may have a condition that would make them vulnerable? Would there be any kind of concessions for them to actually be able to work from home and not have to come into the school?
Yes, we're expecting to have thousands of kids that won't want to return to school. Their parents won't want to put them back into school. So on next Friday, we'll send an initial survey out. That's one of the questions we have is what's the ratio of this? How many in-person kids are we going to get? How many remote learning kids, purely remote learning kids are we going to get? And right now it's a shot in the dark. We don't know that number because we haven't had to operate a model like this yet. So we're going to ask our community on Friday for what's your initial response? Having looked through what the district is planning, would you choose in-person learning or would you choose remote only? That'll help us make some staffing configuration changes. And we expect to have staff who either they're medically fragile, they have a condition that would mean that we would need to keep them out of contact potentially with the virus. They may have children in their home. They may have other family members that they're living with that they want to protect or not expose themselves to for that. And so we're going to have to then rearrange the staff that we have and say some of you are going to have to do only remote learning only. Some of you are going to have to do in-person learning, and see if we can make the staffing preferences on that match the parent preferences on that. So that's another one of those logistical Herculean lifts is try to figure out how to put all that together. And the clock is running, right? We got to figure this out over the next 60 days. So this is not something that you just stand up in August and make the decision. That's why we're coming out really early. And to my knowledge, Jeffco and Boulder are the first districts in the state to come forward with their plans and start saying, here's what we're thinking. I know some other states, I'm connected with other leaders in other states, and I'm asking, what are you thinking? And there's we're not hearing anything. We're not thinking anything. And I'm shocked by that. This is an incredible logistic shift that we have to execute, and the clock is running. So we've got a lot to work to do on this, but one of those challenges is thinking about how we array staff and students in remote and in-person learning.
Tracy, you want to ask the next question? You have to unmute yourself first.
Yes, no, I know that, and I was trying to look at the questions at the same time. But let me ask this question, and this is more towards you, Brianna, and towards you, Rachel, is that one of the questions that's coming up from people that many people are asking is about the Tabor emergency tax. So is the legislature looking at doing the Tabor emergency tax, and why or why not?
Well,
go ahead,
I'll
Rachel.
let Representative Brianna Titone start, and then I'll follow up.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've looked over this provision. It's an interesting provision in Tabor that says that we can implement an emergency tax in emergency times like this, and the pandemic definitely does apply. But in order for us to do that, we would have to deplete our reserves and from what I understand, liquidate our assets. So sell the Capitol and sell some of our state buildings and things like that, which I don't think we really want to be doing, because these are parts of our, we have more expenses to add to that over time anyway. And then we would have to have 2/3 vote of all the legislatures. So that's probably unlikely as well. So that's how I understand it. So I think that it's available to us, but it's really not practical.
And I'll just add that we budget the current law. So, and the process of putting together a budget is projecting what we think our revenues will be, and then budgeting around that number to be able to meet our expected costs. So anything that requires a policy change that's not currently in place, we can't budget to. So even if we were to somehow all the stars aligned and there was some sort of emergency taxing authority, no way to budget to that in this year's budget. By the time in which we have to produce that budget, it could possibly change the situation for the following year, because then those additional revenues that we think that would come from these emergency taxing powers could be then factored in the budget total. But from a practical standpoint, it's not something that is viable for the construction of this year's budget.
All right. You want to ask the next question, Rachel?
Sure. So I think a lot of people are interested in kind of the long-term impacts of this moment in time and how it is impacting the education system as a whole. For example, is this changing the nature of work? Are we figuring out what the impact will be to the type of post-secondary education that our students might need to seek? Do we have any thoughts about how the virus has introduced some of these novelties into the system in looking forward to the future?
Yeah, well, Susan talked about that some around how the things that we're having to do to respond to this present situation, and that we'll have to do in the fall, education to redesign fly. And we have a nationally known thinker on education that lives here in Jeffco named Weston Kieschnick, and he wrote recently that there has been no industry that has responded to this crisis as successfully as public education has, without a bailout. And so he asked, anybody got any examples of a place that any industry that's responded to this as nimbly and as well as public education has? I think when what we're having to do now is shift to these asynchronous approaches that are students are doing a lot more independent work than they used to. So you see an increase in something that we call student agency. It means the student's a lot more in charge of the learning than they were before, where the older model of the teacher is a purveyor of content. The teacher is the expert, and they're filling up the students' minds with content knowledge. Here's the math stuff you need to know. Here's the science stuff you need to know. Content knowledge is vitally important, and one of the skills that we list as vitally important here in Jeffco. But we also know that there's this whole host of other skills that are also important. Things like communication, written and oral communication, complex problem solving, reasoning, critical thinking, creativity, entrepreneurialism, agility, and adaptability. It's those other skills that are being tested right now, and that we're seeing dramatic increase in how our students and staff are using those. So I think going forward, we're likely to see greater utilization of problem and project-based learning approaches. Even if we, on the other side of a vaccine or the virus goes away or whatever, we're going to see more use of that. We're going to see more student agency, where the student is more in charge of and directing the learning. We're going to see greater use of technology, or really flexing the use of technology as a catalyst for what you can do in a classroom and outside the classroom. I've talked some about in other meetings that it's never going to be the same. Education is never going to be the same on the other side of this. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be damaged or because it's harmed by this. There are things that are going to be damaged, but on the other side of this, it's going to be better. I really believe that it's going to be better because our capacity and our strengths and our innovation will have grown through all this. And we're going to be, I firmly believe we're going to be able to deliver a better education model on the other side of this, even though nobody would have chosen to go through this. I really believe that we're learning a lot, and the necessity is driving a lot of innovation and change.
I'd like to just follow up on that quickly. I think a couple things. One is, I do believe from the autonomous learning model that Jeffco uses within its gifted and talented spaces, that children really can have the opportunity to grow in areas if we give them the tools and the foundation in order for them to fly. The challenge is for us is to be able to figure out how do we know they have the foundation in order to be doing the more complex reasoning, to be able to be doing the complex solving that they're going to be facing as they move into the secondary levels, 8th grade, 9th grade, and beyond. The challenge, I had one teacher say, how do you teach reading online if they can't see me pronouncing a word and being able to explain how that word sounds to a child? So I think we have to figure out how we also assess what we're doing. Are we being effective in the processes that we have put in place with teachers and students? And I think we've talked about that at the board level, just from a concept, because we don't know, as Dr. Glass said, what the model is going to be looking like, but we do have to figure out, are we effective? And are we actually getting children their year worth of learning? You know, the hashtag How Are the Children, I think, is going to be very big on Twitter this next year, because that's what we're going to have to be evaluating in all of our models, not just Jeffco and Boulder and Denver, but it's going to be Chicago and Miami and Houston, El Paso, you know, Philadelphia, New York, Massachusetts, even the charters. Are they being effective? I mean, I think all of us are going to be at task. But the other thing is, how do we recognize that the barriers that we perceive to be the barriers of innovation within education, K-12, are they really barriers, or are they something that we can break down and figure out a different way, a different model? As Dr. Glass said, the education model is not going to look like it has for the past number of years. It's just not going to be that way. So it has to be, I agree, it has to come out better for children. It has to come out better for outcomes for our kids, so that the pathways that we envision for them are actually there and they align with what our economy is going to need and what our businesses are going to need and what we're going to need as a country. So I know that sounds, you know, grandiose, but really it is foundational for the child. How are we doing for them? And then how is our system changing and evolving so we can continue to build better outcomes for our kids?
And I think this is an important point, sorry, because I think it's a really critical point that Susan just brought up, that how we get to that aspirational place of, and I heard someone say this the other day, I don't know why, it just seemed very mind-blowing to me, the whole notion of hindsight is 2020 being this year. Like, I feel like hindsight's going to be 2020 because we're going to look back to this year as a turning point in so many ways, for the way in which we teach, the way in which we work, the way in which we are as family units. And there's just a lot that's changing right now. And one of the sort of more practical pieces for right now that will help us get there is, I really think the intention for Dr. Glass and his cabinet and leadership to be soliciting feedback and really concrete ways in which, when we think about the restart plan, for example, to make sure that those voices from teachers at all levels, how this looks for, you know, Miss Barker and Miss Stone as first grade teachers at Stober Elementary, and thinking about a restart plan for 6-year-olds and how virtual learning or hybrid learning looks for 6-year-olds, versus Miss Galvez Estevez, who's working at Everett Middle School and thinking about GT science and how you get those kids to engage in some of the sort of twice exceptional kids. I mean, all of these things look very different across the grade levels, across the capacities of each child, needs of each child. So I appreciate that we are going to be hearing, and I encourage strongly, for anyone, whether you're working with Jeffco Public Schools or you're a parent, you're a community member, fill out the surveys that come to you. Submit responses and questions to how this could look, should look, would look. those things really inform how this is going to move forward. And it's complicated. There is nothing easy about this. It's messy. It gets messier the more feedback you ask for. And I think we're all inviting that messiness at this point so that we can get to that place where this is going to be better on the other side of it. But we need that.
So I have a question that has been asked of me, and I have no good answer. And so I figured I would ask the best minds that we have here at the table. What do parents, perhaps a single parent, that must return to work do if we are still doing online schooling or even a hybrid version of schooling, if their child is of school age? So they're not in the home to be able to monitor or to be able to assist with the learning. And if they're able to find a daycare situation or some sort of childcare facility, will those childcare facilities be equipped to be able to provide the online learning that will be taking place during the day?
That's a really tough question. I think some of what we've been doing over the past 2 months it helps us think about what the fall is going to be. Again, we're committed to restoring some form of in-person learning for the fall, but we're going to be operating under the same social distancing restrictions that the whole community is. So unless that radically changes or improves over the next couple of months, we can't have everybody back in the building at the same time together. One, because I don't have enough staff to do it. Two, I don't have enough space to do it. So the math just doesn't work. To put everybody back in school exactly like it was. I think that parents are going to have to think about what resources do you have that are available to you? Is that family? Is that a church? Is it a nonprofit? What supports can you pull together? That also has to be coupled with working with their employer. What flexibility the employee could work from home or shifts. We're going to have to see adaptability there. Also, what supports can we as a school district provide? On days that a student may not be in school, can we provide some programming that allows for a kid to have a safe place to go? Well, that's going to be tough because we're going to have to cut tens of millions of dollars out of this, but have a new revenue line to make that happen. So that all of these things we're going to have to figure out. I wish we had a different set of facts and assumptions to work with at this point, but we don't. So I think all of us, from the parent to the employer to the community to the school district, we're all going to have to figure out how to do this. And that's going to be.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I have another question here, and I think that it's relevant. I heard from some teachers, and they were saying some of the students are struggling with their computers and internet access. And I know you talked about that a little bit, but how can the community help? And is there a list of needs that's available that they can access to help out? And one of the things I just wanted to plug is the PCs for People.org. They are an organization that takes in computers and they refurbish them and then they give them away to people for a very, very, very low price. And they have an agreement going on with you guys at Jeffco, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. We, again, thanks to the voters for 5A, because 5A allowed us to move forward with the Tech for Ed program. And so that meant that we had devices for next year. That Tech for Ed program will pay for devices for all our 5th and 6th graders and all our 9th and 10th graders. And then eventually it'll pay for every kid 5th grade and up. So that, again, thank you voters for 5A. So that was the support that we had, and that will keep growing. We also had, prior to 5A passing, schools practically across the whole district had implemented one-to-one programs everywhere. So you had schools that either use their school dollars or the PTA, or they use a fee process to purchase devices for students. So when we looked at the entirety of all of the devices that Jeffco had, from the Tech for Ed and the devices that were purchased at the building level, we could do it. Like we were practically a one-to-one district already. Now, as this has gone on, we've got devices that are 4 or 5 years old. I mean, a Chromebook 4 or 5 years old is an old Chromebook, and it's slow, and its screen is purple. And my son has got one with a purple screen and a missing button. So we know that these things wear out. They do. And so we have to think about how we replenish them. I would point people to the Jeffco Schools Foundation. The Jeffco Schools Foundation has done a nice job standing up a fundraiser where if you want to provide financial support, it goes into a special fund, and we're using that to address technology problems, either purchasing more Chromebooks, connecting people with low cost or free internet access, or buying them a hotspot, a Wi-Fi hotspot like this one that I have here. Giving a family one of these. So we have sort of a triage model that we use to make sure that people have access and have a working device. We've also used Jeffco's economy of scale to buy thousands of these devices, and we did that very early because, again, we started looking at where other countries were in this process, and we were saying, this is not going to go away at the end of the school year. We're probably going to have to be in a one-to-one device environment, and we're going to have things that break and that go out of reach the end of their useful life. We're going to have to replace them. So we've bought Chromebooks. The Jeffco Schools Foundation is another mechanism by which you can support this in our community. And then the program, Representative Titone, that you mentioned. All of those are ways that the community can support this, and that we will meet the technology problem going forward.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We are winding down. We have just a couple more minutes left, so probably not enough time for any more questions. But is there any other closing quick thoughts you want to leave us with? Some things that we can help tell the folks who are listening today?
I defer to my board members.
I would like to just emphasize how important it is for us to listen to everybody and to have people give us ideas. I think we've all said here, Stephanie and Dr. Glass and I have all said this is something that we all have to work on and solve together. It's not going to be solved by one individual or just a couple people. It's going to have to be all of us working together. And Stephanie and I, as I said a couple weeks ago or 10 days ago, had our first forum of reaching out to the community, and we're hoping to do more of those, and we'll be putting those events up on our website. I think I'm speaking fairly, Stephanie.
Yep.
Yeah, and I hope that people will just send us emails, send us iMessages on our Facebook pages. You can contact us at our websites. So it's just really important that we hear from people. We also have people bring us solutions and ideas. I mean, one of the ones that I saw come up in the chat was, talking about what schools have low numbers and using those buildings for childcare. I think, that was raised at our school board meeting before last week, which was, what happens to those buildings that maybe there's a lot of kiddos that don't come back to school? Do we use it differently? And I think Dr. Glass and his team are looking at those kinds of opportunities as well. But really, it's helpful for us to be able to just hear from people, and the ideas that are coming from you are very helpful. So thank you for all of that. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
And I'll just say ditto.
And I just want to say thank you so much. We had about 120 people on this Zoom at one point. People are so interested. I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so impressed with the transition that you all made, with the support that you're giving to both of our kids, our staff, our teachers, how you're looking at planning for the future. I can't be prouder than to be part of Jeffco. So thank you all very much.
Thanks for letting us be a part of it.
Yeah,
Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. And we will have, we'll get to the rest of the questions. We're gonna try to get those addressed for everyone, and then we'll post them on our Facebook pages, or we'll distribute them somehow. I would encourage anyone who's still on the call here. We have great newsletters, and Jeffco has a great newsletter as well. So if you don't have newsletters, please subscribe to those so you can stay up to date with all the information. I know that Senator Zenziger and Representative Kraft-Tharp and myself try to disseminate that information that comes from the school district. So we try to stay on top of that, but that's a good resource for you to have. So any closing remarks from our other legislative partners here?
I just want to thank our panelists. I feel so very lucky to be living in Jefferson County and to having such a thoughtful superintendent and school board that are taking the time to really dig into these issues. I know that everybody is trying their best, and so I just really appreciate your transparency and your thoughtfulness around these issues. I know that this is going to be a super difficult, stressful time because of all three of those impacts that Dr. Glass spoke about at the beginning, those big giant issues that we're facing. From a budgetary perspective, I just wanted to offer up that to the degree possible, when you have to make a 25% reduction in your budget and a $3.5 billion gap to fill, it's going to be really difficult to insulate education from potential cuts. But so far, the process that the state legislature is engaging with on our budget is we are really trying to look to all areas of the budget first in order to try and keep the budget stabilization factor flat. That has been our goal. That has been what we are pushing forward in our work. We have been reserving until the end of the budget cutting process, having to pull the trigger on cuts to education. And that's because we're hoping to get there as to the best of our ability to really try and make sure that you all have the resources that you need to be able to implement these changes that we know are here already and that we'll be faced with making in the future. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Yeah. Thanks very much for joining us today. Thank you for all your work, and thank you for all the attendees for joining us today. So we'll have a recording of this also, so you'll be able to listen to it again if you missed any of it. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.